This video is really going to be about how I came to stop believing in hell and how I came to realize that the Bible, in fact, didn't even teach hell the way that it had been kind of handed to me in the church growing up. So in the last video, I explained a little bit of my thought process and a big aha moment that I had when I realized that so many of the ideas that we have about hell come out of certain passages of the Bible that are intended to be very metaphorical and use of hyperbole and symbolism. And it was a big aha moment when I realized that so many of these passages were being interpreted in very literal ways when, in my view, they weren't intended to. So that was a big aha moment for me, and I wanted to tell a little bit more of the story and kind of bring an ending to it. There's a principle in psychology and in persuasion, and it's this notion that when we hear something a lot of times from a lot of different places, it sort of solidifies in our brains. The more we hear something, the more we start to believe that it's true. This is what's so profound about groupthink, and regardless of what group you're in, a religion, a political group, an organization, that when you hear the same thing over and over again, you start to believe it. And so that was very true for me with the idea of hell, because growing up in the church, and particularly going to a Baptist church and then going to a Christian Bible college, we learned about hell a lot. Hell was talked about. It was mentioned by a lot of preachers. And oftentimes it was sort of the big hook in the sermon, right? You got to accept Christ or you're going to go to hell. And so I had heard about hell coming at me from every direction growing up. And so I just believed that it was true. It was as clear as the blue sky. That was the truth. And yet I expressed in earlier videos how I really struggled with the idea, and it caused sort of an existential exasperation. I was profoundly frustrated and burdened by the idea that God would send his people he created and send them to hell. So along the way of my journey, I found myself going to a church that was different from the churches I had been raised in. And it was what you might call a more seeker-friendly church, and they didn't talk about hell at all. What I've come to realize is that period of time, it was kind of like I was able to take a break from hell. I was able to kind of step away from that without realizing that's what I was doing. But by not hearing about hell for a while, I was able to detox the idea a little bit in my brain. And as things go, years go by, and I'm a part of this church for a while. There was some things that happened at this church, some shakeups, and I ended up leaving that church. And one of the pastors started a new church plant, and we were essentially, it was kind of like a little house church that we started. And so I started going to this house church, and we met in a clubhouse. And there was a group of guys at this church that really took their evangelism seriously. And because it was like kind of a young, small church, it didn't have the sort of like central leadership that a lot of larger churches have. So everybody was kind of like, how would I put it? Everyone was taking ownership of the church. And so some of these guys, they were raised like me. They had a very literal interpretation of these passages about hell, and they believed that people were going there if they didn't know Jesus. And so the logical conclusion was like, we've got to be preaching the gospel and sharing our faith with everyone we meet. I don't want to call these guys extreme, but they were very passionate, and they were very intense. And I remember kind of encountering this and feeling there was something about it that didn't feel right to me. It brought me back to the hell topic after being away from it for a while, after sort of detoxing it from my brain for a little while. And it gave me a fresh kind of perspective of like how I really feel about this topic. And that was when I started to really think like, I don't know if I really believe this, because something just doesn't feel right about it. And, you know, I admit that like, if hell is real, then these guys were right. And in extremism can be justified. Like these guys that, you know, carry crosses down the street and preach on the street corners, you know, standing on a box in the middle of the city. I mean, most of us look at that and that's kind of extreme. And, but it's actually, you know, it might not be, you could argue it's not a good approach, but it is justified if hell is real, because it's an emergency. People are going there. And so I was confronted with this, like, do I really believe this? I started to look into it. I started to do research. And I remember coming across an article online, and I don't remember who wrote it, but it was written from a Catholic perspective, and it was a Catholic scholar making his case for a biblical case for universalism. And if you're not familiar, universalism is the notion that that all people will ultimately go to heaven or be redeemed. And there's a lot of different nuances and subcategories within that view of Christianity. But it made an argument for universalism, and I found it refreshing and a bit persuasive, actually, because it had verses explaining why this person believed in universalism. I ended up coming across a documentary. I'm going to put a link to this documentary down below. It came out in 2012. It was produced by a guy named Kevin Miller, and it's called Hellbound. And it's essentially like a deep dive into the debate of hell and universalism within the church. And he interviewed all of these pastors and authors and thought leaders in the church that were popular at that time, and got a diverse kind of range of perspectives. And that documentary got things started for me. That documentary introduced me to a guy named Brad Jersak. And Brad Jersak wrote the book called Her Gates Will Never Be Shut. And I got a copy of that book, and I did a deep dive into that book. And it was remarkable to come to see how much the English translation of the Bible had butchered this notion of hell. And really caused a lot of problems, because there's all these different words that have different meanings. There's Hades, there's Sheol. Those are the more Greek concepts of the underworld. And then there's this concept of Gehenna, which was a valley in Jerusalem. And Gehenna was a symbol for destruction, because it had a history of child sacrifice. In the Old Testament, Jeremiah refers to Gehenna as, he calls it the Valley of Slaughter. And in Her Gates Will Never Be Shut, he explains that this word Gehenna has this history as a symbolic word about destruction, and not the kind of destruction that we think of in religious and Christian terms, like your soul is going to go and be destroyed in hell, but like a literal destruction. And that's essentially what the hell passages in the Gospels are about. Jesus is talking to the Pharisees most of the time. He's talking to the religious leaders of his day. And he is telling them that that the fruit of their ways essentially is going to lead them to be thrown into Gehenna. and he uses very like crazy inflammatory language. He calls the Pharisees whitewashed tombs with rotting bones inside. He refers to them as a brood of vipers. Like, he did not like the Pharisees, the religious leaders, and they were essentially they were the religious leaders. They were the priest class, but they were also the politicians. The religious leaders, the politicians were one and the same, and he did not seem to have much appreciation for the way they were running things. And so Jesus had a lot of harsh words, and he said over and over again, he said, you're going to be thrown into Gehenna, where there's going to be weeping of gnashing of teeth. Most of the time that the word hell is in the Gospels, when Jesus is talking about hell, the word that's being used is Gehenna. And there are some other Greek words, I believe, that were also translated hell. But that was the big one. And that's a lot of the famous hell passages found in like Matthew and in Mark. Anyway, the King James Bible just caused a lot of problems by translating all of these words as hell. And then kind of culturally, we developed this perception of hell as this dungeon, this afterlife place of burning fire and the devil with a pitchfork. As it turned out, wasn't even really biblical in the way that it had been taught to me. This is a really cool spot, so check this out. And there's a bird up there singing his heart out. A mockingbird. I'm over 40 now, so I'm suddenly interested in birds. Got the little bird identifier app on my phone. You turn 40 and suddenly you start listening to jazz. You get the bird app. You start going to bed at 9 o'clock. So coming to the conclusion that the Bible, in fact, didn't teach hell in the way that I had been taught in the church. It was a relief, and it was a lot to process, quite frankly. And it also made me kind of angry, if I'm to be honest. And there's more to be said about that. That was a major turning point in my deconstruction, was dealing with the topic of hell, as it is for many people. I'm not really an academic. I don't spend a lot of time reading books. I read even less now than I did back then. I'm more of a storyteller, and so that's what I'm doing here, is I'm just telling the story of how I came to these conclusions. And yeah, so that's why I'm doing this, is to express myself and share the story, and also to connect with others that have been through this journey, and maybe encourage some people that are maybe in the midst of this journey right now, because I know it can be a very challenging and painful experience. A lot of doubt, a lot of fear can come up, and it's good to have other voices, other people that have been through it before, to hear their story, so that you can have some solace and some connection, and knowing that you're not alone in it. So let me know in the comments if you've been on a similar journey, and what your thoughts are. I'm going to put some links to some resources in the description of this video. That documentary I mentioned, the Hellbound documentary, Her Gates Will Never Be Shut, and a few other things I mentioned. I'll be sure to put links to. I'm gonna have to chop this one up. Like, nobody wants to see me just sit here going, Well, just gonna leave it at that. Peace.